Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Get Up and Go with Canon workshop. And we'll be very shortly visiting the Bosque del Apache Wildlife Preserve, where two of our outstanding and talented folks from Canon are wonderful EOL, Explorer of Light, and professional photographer Charles Glatzer, and Canon Pro Rep Kelly Anderson will be joining us. So later today, we're going to be spending a lot of time with you. For over the next hour and a half, we're going to be teaching you about birding and quite a few of our cameras, including the EOS R5 and our EOS R3, in addition to a number of our different lenses. Today, we're going to be your hosts. My name is Brandon Chin, and joining me is Mr. Rudy Winston.
Hi, everybody. This is going to be a tremendous opportunity, I think, for our attendees to be able to not only learn directly from a renowned wildlife photographer, Chaz Glatzer, but to actually interact. And you're going to have the opportunity to type in questions directly to either Canon staff, myself and Brandon, as well as our colleague Kelly Anderson in New Mexico, and to Chaz as well. Now, to do that, we're broadcasting this live stream on several different platforms, but to be able to interact with the chat, you need to be on the hopin.com platform. And there's a quick registration process. You may see the phrase "get a ticket." That just simply means just complete the registration, nothing more than that. And if you're not on the Hopin platform right now, you'll see information for it on the screen. And so with no further ado, I want to introduce you to Chaz Glatzer. And let's get an idea of the kind of work he does, and then we'll talk to the man directly.
My name's Charles Glatzer. I'm a wildlife photographer, educator, lecturer, instructor. We host workshops all around the world. When I first went from the commercial world to wildlife, I had a lot of friends say, "You're nuts. You know, how do you think you're going to make a living? You know, nobody makes a living selling wildlife pictures." You know what? It's not really about the wildlife pictures. It's about the experience and also about teaching people how to do wildlife. Being an instructor, an educator, and seeing the light bulb go off, you know, as it were, for the photographers that I have in the field to understand, bang, hey, I got this. You know, I figured this spot metering out. That's what fires me up to say, hey, this is why I do what I do. You know, to help these budding photographers learn about the process. You know, we have to wait for the stars to align. We're looking for the light to be right, the background to be right, the behavior to be right, the focal length to be right, the f-stop, the shutter speed, the autofocus. All of those things have to come together at one precise moment, whether that's a 30th of a second or, you know, a 4,000th of a second. It's a quick fleeting moment. And when you get in that zone and you fire that camera off, you get elated. I mean, I feel it now. I got this overwhelming sense inside. That's the culmination of everything I do. That's 32 years in a 4,000th of a second. There is no better feeling. Guys, I just want to thank everybody for being here. We're at Bosque del Apache. Appreciate you joining in today. It's going to be a fantastic morning. Again, my name is Charles Glatzer, Canon Explorer of Light, and we are here in Bosque del Apache, New Mexico. We're also joined with Kelly Anderson. Kelly, why don't you jump in for a minute and just say hello to everybody.
Thanks, Chaz. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Anderson with Canon, and we are here at Bosque del Apache. Welcome to our virtual event. I want to go back to Charles really quick because I know he's got some bird action going on there, so we will talk soon. Back to Chaz.
Thanks, Kelly. I think it's going to be an epic morning. We have all the birds kind of coming into the pond. And the reason we chose this location after scouting it for a few days and the opportunity I've had to be here many years is we get what's called a blast off. And that's really what we're looking for. So as the birds start to come into the pond, they start to congregate. They all fly in from different flocks and different feeding areas and roosting areas overnight. And you'll hear this murmur. We can hear it now on the video. And then you're going to start to pick up this big crescendo. It's mesmerizing. And then it gets dead quiet. And then all of a sudden, they take off and the sky completely fills with birds. It's going to blow your mind, and that's our goal. It's to capture that action. And we want to show a sense of context. I don't want to shoot tight originally. I want to get the viewer to see and understand exactly what's happening. So I'm picking a 24-105 on RF lens on the brand new R3. And if you check out the back of the camera here, I'm going to come in and out. So I have some foreground, I have middle ground, and then I want to fill the sky up completely with birds. I don't want a lot of negative space. If the birds are just going in drips and drabs, I'm going to tilt the camera down. I'm going to zoom in to slightly eliminate the negative space, and that'll fill up with birds as well. And I have the option of going up or down. The other really cool thing about the R3 is the fact I can just flip a button, and I could set my video up like that. I can push my shutter button, fire off a video, it maintains those settings, switch right back to stills, and just rock and roll from there. So it allows me to do both in the field, capture video and capture stills extremely quickly, and we're just waiting to see what happens. If you haven't tried the R3, I totally suggest that you do. The new autofocus system is absolutely phenomenal. It locks on and acquires birds super quick. It tracks them like no other camera I've ever used before in the field. We have a stacked CMOS sensor, which rocks in the low light. I was shooting this morning some stuff at 6400 ISA without any question, any problems at all. Simply easy to just kind of, if you do need noise reduction, kick that down a little bit. I'm not too concerned with the ISOs for the most part. You know, for me, it's more about the content. I can always knock the noise out, but I definitely want to keep my shutter speeds and f-stops where I think it's appropriate. So when these birds take off, I do want a little bit of motion in the wings. I don't think nature is static, so I want to show everybody that. So typically around a 200th of a second works for me to start to freeze the birds, and you know, enough depth of field with this. Since we are shooting wide, the depth of field isn't as important, but when I do zoom in, now it starts to become, you know, just to capture enough depth of field with that. So I'm going to try and stop the lens down as the light level starts to increase. And you can even see that now on the back of the camera. So I'm at 640, right, at f5. So now I can keep that up. So let's go back down to 400, and I can kind of go to 7.1. The cool thing about mirrorless cameras, live histogram, right? What I see is essentially what I get. So I can adjust it in real time. I could just touch the back of the screen and move my focus points. I can go from spot focus to center point. I can go to 4 points around or zones. And I have been using the zones a lot for this blast off. It's really cool. I move it up just a little bit higher. When the birds take off, it'll lock on the birds in flight for me, and we get tap sharp images. You can change the screen, you know, check your levels and all that stuff as you can in the other cameras. But I definitely want that foreground in the picture. I think when we're doing landscapes, it's important to always have a foreground, middle ground, background, lead the viewer's eyes through the photograph. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So essentially this is an animalscape type image. And I have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And hopefully in a couple of minutes, that foreground, the background, the sky is going to completely fill with the birds. It's absolutely amazing. Kelly, how are you doing over there? What's really going on with the birds at your location?
Well, over here we have mostly snow geese, and I see some cranes, and they're still hanging out in the water. The birds here at Bosque, they stay in the water in the middle overnight so that nothing eats them, pretty much. And then as photographers, we all kind of gather, we wait for the sun to come up. In my location, I'm kind of behind a mountain area, so I'm waiting for the sun to peek up over that mountain. When that happens, this area over here and the birds behind me will light up with this orange, amazing color. And the way that it is at Bosque, you kind of never know how each morning is going to be. If there's clouds, you might get like a bright red sun look. And today we have a couple of clouds and it's looking a little orangey. So I think it's going to be pretty.
So right now we're picking up
and the fog.
Some red in the sky. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Your spot's going to be absolutely amazing. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that. Right now where we are, we have some red clouds that are beginning to light up. We have the red reflection in the water. I actually just had a coot swim by in the foreground. I'll take that as a little bonus additive. But we have this foreground, middle ground, background with the red clouds and stuff. To look to the left, there's a bunch more birds for me, but the picture's not as dramatic if I swing over here without the clouds in the sky.
right? So I'm picking what I call a window of opportunity. For me, that's where the light's best, that's where the background's best, that's where I'm gonna set up ahead of time and be proactive. So I don't wanna be reactive, right? I don't wanna keep zipping the camera around and all that stuff. I wanna be as proactive as possible, which for me means see the image in your mind, figure out the tools and techniques to capture that vision. And that's what we're doing. So again, to reiterate, we have the 24 to 105, I have the R3, the clouds are kind of zipping in, there's a little bit more clouds in the sky, so I'm gonna zoom out just slightly so I can pick up a little bit more of the clouds and hopefully get the birds when they kind of go aloft. Yeah, we're all good. So let's just take a couple of quick questions.
Yeah, so, yeah, Chaz, we got a great question from Ben Saunders. He was asking what you're actually shooting as far as your exposure. Are you in manual mode? What are your settings?
Yeah, so thank you. 99% of the time I'm in manual mode. You know, I don't want the camera to make the decisions for me. If I can do that, I want to be proactive and lock it in. If I do shoot in automatic mode, every time I move the camera and I fill it with a different percentage of tonal values, the exposure is going to fluctuate. So it's going to get lighter, it's going to get darker, and I'm going to sit there and play with the compensation wheel to get it back to what I think it is. So typically I tell everybody same light, same exposure. And since I am looking through the back of the camera, I do have a live histogram, and what I see is what I get. I could adjust in real time. You know, the big question for most people is why don't you just put it in auto ISO? Well, auto ISO uses the same thing. So it's going to be determined by whatever meter pattern I have. And again, if the sky fills with black birds, the picture's going to get lighter. Fills with white sky, the picture's going to get darker. I don't want it to do that. So I'm setting the exposure up for my highlights, and then basically the birds are going to be a silhouette. Let me just do this for a minute. I can kind of articulate my screen a little bit, which is another really cool advantage for the R3. So you guys can see that in real time, right? So I could adjust my exposure to whatever I think is appropriate. I want to make sure that the histogram is not kicking off the right side, which means I'm blocking up my highlights. So my exposure looks perfect there. I can just adjust my focus points and I can rock off the pictures. So all I'm going to do now is wait for this guy to fill up a little bit, move my focus point up a little bit higher, and rock and roll.
Yeah, we got another great
Any other
question
questions?
We got another great question from Cheryl Moore, and she's actually asking, do you back button focus on your EOS R3 that you're shooting?
Back button focus. It depends really what I'm doing. So if we're using the animal tracking and the eye detect and all that stuff, I don't think the back button is necessary. For wildlife and things like that, there's no reason for me to stop the camera from focusing. So why do I want to use two fingers to do one thing, right? It doesn't make sense to me, particularly if things are moving constantly. If I'm going to shoot stills like landscapes, or I'm going to shoot portraits and things like that, back button focus works great. I push the button, take my finger off, and the camera stops focusing. Normally, I want to keep the focus active. And by using my finger to depress the shutter and activate focus, I can use my thumb to do some other things. I will set up custom buttons on the back to go from like spot focus to zone, or turn on and off subject detect, things like that. So I could use my thumb for things and the back buttons for things that I think are more appropriate. But as far as focus, no, my autofocus is on my shutter button.
Thanks.
Michael
Look at that red
Turndrup asked
sky.
an interesting. Michael Turndrup asked an interesting question too, and what he's asking is any suggestions on shooting birds, specifically cardinals, in his backyard and near his home in snow.
So for me, if, again, subjects in the same light as the snow, you can expose for basically anything. If you don't want to overexpose the snow and make sure that, you don't clip the highlights, which I don't do. I try and show as much detail as I can in the complete imagery. I just make sure that, point the camera at the snow and make sure that the histogram isn't clipping off the right end. You can use a spot meter and go +2 off the snow. Right? Spot meter's job is to take whatever's in the pattern and render it as gray. So I want to make it 2 stops brighter. +1 is light gray, +2 is white with detail. But you can actually see it in real time with the mirrorless camera. And if you lock the exposure in manual mode, or if you are using any of the auto modes and you push the auto exposure lock, particularly auto exposure lock with a hold function, it will stay in the camera as if you were shooting in manual. So you can adjust the exposure, make sure it's real, pick the camera up and shoot the cardinal, as long as the cardinal is in the same light. If the cardinal's in the shade and snow is in the sun, then it becomes a different problem. You gotta, expose for the light on the subject.
Thanks for sharing, Charles.
The sky is
we gotta
glowing here,
need-
boys.
We are jealous of you here in the Canon showroom here in New York. I know you guys might be cold, but we're getting some great questions. We're having people chime in from all across the world. I just saw somebody checking in from Iran, somebody checking in from the Smoky Mountains, Florida, Germany, Canada, Alberta, Edmonton. We're hearing you, so if you have any questions for Charles or Kelly, please go and hit us up on the Hop In chat, and we'll be sure to go and keep on checking in with them. So another great question from Ben Saunders was about your setup, Charles. So he's asking about the dial configuration for your front wheel. Is that a ISO adjustment?
One cool thing about the new mirrorless cameras that they did was give us 3 really accessible dials for essentially the exposure triangle: shutter speed, f-stop, and ISO. So I just turn my index wheel on the top that's set up for my shutter speed, the mode button changes my ISO, and the back or thumb wheel changes my f-stop. So I can do that extremely quickly. I'll just give you guys a quick tip if you're in manual mode. So you have your shutter speed and your f-stop, right? And essentially if I go 3 clicks to the right with my shutter speed, I'm increasing the shutter speed. If I go 3 clicks to the left with my aperture, I'm letting in more light. So it's a compensatory change and I maintain the same exposure, right? So I can quickly change that. So I can go from like 800 at 5.6 to 1600 at f4. Right, just 3 up, 3 down, really fast, maintain the same exposure, but I'm changing the parameters of the image. So I have to determine what's more important. Is it f-stop or shutter speed, right? And sometimes it's a combination of both. If I'm looking at a scene and I go, hey, I really want to shoot this at 2,000th of a second at f8, then I'm just going to adjust the ISO to get those particular settings. But I'm going to do it manually. I'm not going to let the camera make those decisions for me. And I think that's imperative if you want to produce successfully, images over a long period of time. It's easier to get one, but if you can be proactive and understand in your mind, figure out the tools and techniques to capture that vision ahead of time, set the camera up to capture that vision, you're going to be way ahead of the game rather than being reactive.
Patrick Nunn,
We have
and
a
I
beautiful scene in
apologize.
front of us.
Patrick Nunn, and I apologize if
Rudy.
I'm doing anything wrong with the names here, has an interesting question, and I'm actually going to take a stab, Chaz, at answering this one. His question is, what is the great difference between this camera, talking about the EOS R3, and the EOS 1DX Mark III? And really, there are a number of fundamental differences when we're talking the digital SLR, which is obviously a viable platform, versus the new mirrorless cameras and the new technologies they bring. You have obviously a legacy of tremendous lenses, tremendous performance, and focusing performance in particular with cameras like the 1DX Mark III, great durability, and so on. The biggest differences, in my opinion, are going to be in a couple of areas. One is, although the focusing systems are proven on the digital SLRs, especially the high-end digital SLRs, there's no question that recent mirrorless cameras have really taken things to another level in 2 specific areas when we're talking autofocus. One is that with most lenses, not all, but most of them, you can focus over virtually the entire picture area. With the digital SLR, you obviously have a limited range of focusing points. You have more of the scene that is outside the area that the focusing system can see. So to some degree, there are going to be times when your composition is limited because you got to keep a focusing point on a subject. The other thing is that while high-end pro digital SLRs like the 1DX Mark III can shoot at really fast frame rates, up to 14, 16 frames a second in the case of the 1DX Mark III. The fact is that, with a camera like the EOS R6 or the R5, if you go to electronic shutter, you have the ability to shoot up to 20 frames a second with autofocus. And on a camera like the R3, 30 frames a second with autofocus. Now that may sound like, what's the difference? But I'm sure, and I'll ask Chaz to contribute on this, that the nuances in things like wing position and so on in bird photography that you can get at 30 frames a second compared to slower, albeit still fast, frame rates. Chaz, if you can hear this, maybe you can chime in a little bit on what you've observed with 30 frames a second. How many doors, so to speak, has this opened up for you?
Absolutely, Rudy. I couldn't agree with you more. The 30 frames a second definitely allows you to capture those little subtle differences in wing movements, which can kind of make or break a picture. You know, if we have a bear hauling through the water, you know, or he's diving in the water off a rock to catch his sockeye, I can pick that precise moment, you know, when he's going to do the splash. And, you know, with the slow frame rates, we used to be able to kind of get close and try and time it. But this way we can put those sequences together and pull out, yeah, those little subtle details. One other mention with the new R3, there's virtually no shutter lag and there's no rolling shutter. So I can bang off these pictures with these birds now, like I did yesterday, you know, with 3200th of a second, 6400th of a second, nail the wing positions, tack sharp in flight, and have no rolling shutter effect at all. That is a huge advantage with this camera as well, and do so at 30 frames a second. We do have the birds starting to move around a little bit. I think they're going to start to move and take off. We also have an epic picture in here. I did kind of set my composition up really cool. So we have a tree in the right of the frame. I think, Drew, you could probably pop one of those on there and show everybody, which looks really nice. I have a foreground with the reflections in the background. We have the color in the sky. And I'm just tweaking my exposure manually, right? So as it starts to get a little bit brighter, then I can make decisions. What's more important? F-stop, shutter speed, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I could drop my ISO down, right? So let's say I went 3 clicks to the left, 1, 2, 3, go from 3200 to 1600. Well, that means I got to open my f-stop and let more light in, right? So it's all a compromise. What do I want? So I'd rather go for the 3200 ISO again, you know, because this camera can really handle it, and kind of change my f-stop a little bit to make sure that I have enough depth of field. So 800th of a second is going to give me a lot of, you know, birds that are going to be really sharp, a little bit of movement in there. Again, I don't mind, but I have F9, which gives me my foreground and my background in focus.
Thanks for sharing,
Any
Charles.
other questions, guys?
We got a question from Christopher Ortiz. He's actually asking, top 3 lenses for wildlife.
Top 3 lenses. I would say what I take now all across the globe with me. If I only have 3 lenses, it's the 24 to 105 f4, the RF. I have the RF 100 to 500 that hangs off strap on my side with another body, preferably the same body. I know that's a little crazy for most, but having the same ergonomics is a lot easier for me. And I have the 600. So 600 f4 allows me to shoot, you know, low light, longer focal lengths. I could put the 1.4 out there, be it 840 at 5.6. And then I have the 1 to 5, so we're pretty seamless from 24 to 600 millimeters. And then I put the converter 840, so those 3 lenses give me basically everything that I need.
Excellent. We got a lot of lenses. If you see us here in our New York location, here at the showroom at Canon USA's corporate headquarters, you'll see a lot of lenses behind us. We have a lens pretty much for every type of situation. And as you see on the table, a lot of these lenses will actually be out in the field today with Kelly and Charles. So once again, you know, if you're joining us a little bit late into our show, we're going to be hanging out for a good hour and a half. And throughout the day, if you have a question, put it in the hop-in chat, and between Rudy and myself, we'll pin them, we'll get some answers. Rudy, did you see any questions you want to get some answers to?
I wanted a lot of great questions, but before I get to that, there was a point I just wanted to kind of expand upon when the person asked Chaz what are his 3 favorite lenses. That's great insight for a high-end professional wildlife shooter. What are your favorite 3 lenses? But we do obviously understand that not everybody is, you know, going to be able to get the big white super telephoto lenses and that kind of thing. The cool thing is whether you shoot digital SLR or whether you shoot mirrorless, doesn't matter. There are a lot in the Canon line. There are a lot of more affordable choices that can still get you into really excellent birding photography and so on. One of them is the 100 to 400 millimeter lens that we just recently introduced. My colleague Kelly Anderson, who's on site at Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, is actually using that lens, and I'm sure she'll comment about this lightweight lens. It still gives you 400 millimeter telephoto capability on a full frame camera when we get back to her in a moment.
Yeah, I think that we got some questions, but before we jump into some more questions, how about we check in with
Viewfinder. The birds are starting to dribble and drab off. They haven't been a big blast off, but the sun is right on the horizon about to peak off. So I'm adjusting my exposure kind of quick here in real time. Drew's probably popping some of the little feed up online there. And what I am going to do as soon as the sun pops above the horizon is go to f22 so I get a starburst effect. And that should look pretty cool too. So we'll see what happens. They're kind of tricking, drabbing, and just kind of popping off. Here they come a little bit, but not really happening too much. So if you guys got a couple more questions, we can kind of go there. If it takes off all at once here, we'll cut back live.
Yeah, so we got a great question from Jerry Napier. I hope that's how you say it, so apologies in advance. But he's asking, I guess the photos are just so vibrant in colors. Are you using a filter out there? I'm guessing he's asking about a circular polarizer, perhaps?
He was showing just a few moments ago. Customer asked, is that a lens that's available for mirrorless or for digital SLRs or both? And the answer is this 100 to 400 lens is an RF lens for the Canon mirrorless full frame cameras. But if you're a digital SLR users, there are a series of 70 to 300 millimeter lenses that are similarly lightweight, high performance telephoto lenses. Now, they don't get you to 400 millimeter, but they're going to give you that combination of telephoto power and affordability and portability that is so important for folks that are getting into wildlife.
Thanks so much, Rudy. We have so many great questions in here. Please keep them coming. I know we have people posting from all over the world. We've had Germany, we've had, I think, Mumbai, all over. If you have the opportunity, you have some time to go and hang out with us, please put your questions in the hop-in chat. And just a friendly reminder, when you register for this event and you get that ticket, we're actually going to be donating $1 for every registration. So that's our part on Canon to donate to the Bosque del Apache Wildlife Reserve. So please spread the word on the social side of things and tell all your friends to join in and hear some great feedback and information from both Charles and Kelly. So to get you guys out of Melville, back out in the field, we got a great question from this old Mac, which is Chaz. What case do you prefer, the R5 or the R3?
Oh, it depends what I'm shooting. So if I'm looking for fast action stuff, where I need that 30 frame burst rate, electronic shutter with no rolling shutter stuff, no kind of distortion, I'm definitely going for the R3. If I'm shooting things where I need more resolution, higher res, things like that, I will definitely go to the R5. So, pick the right tool for the right job. In all honesty, I think the R5 is the most versatile camera that Canon has ever come out with. The feature sets they're wonderful for me. I mean, we can do time lapse, we can do focus stacking, right? We can, it's just there's a whole genre. I mean, you have bulb timers, we have everything that we really need to kind of encompass every type of photography that I do. I've shot night stuff with it, I've shot in-flight stuff with it. So I think that camera is extremely versatile. And I do love the 45 megapixels I can kind of crop in. But for shooting what I'm doing right now, fast action, I think the R3 is superior. So pick the right tool for the job.
That's great insight, Chaz. For those of you that are tuning in and you're seeing some lines go across the screen, we're actually broadcasting with our Cinema EOS C500 Mark II and a variety of different other cameras, but that's actually the ND system that's switching so that we can actually get the proper exposure while we're recording this video. So you can actually use these cameras as live stream cameras and webcams. So that's what you're actually seeing out in the field. So we're getting a lot of questions. Another great one was about autofocus settings. So Chaz, using zone autofocus, how do you decide which of the three choices to use?
Yeah, so with the zone focus on the R3, I can define that. And that is, again, another super cool feature. So I can change the format per se, right, of those boxes. I can make them narrow, I can make them wide, I can make them vertical, horizontal, and then by using the joystick, I can move that zone left, right, up, or down. So I can set that up and then put subject detect, and the camera will lock on the subject that it sees anywhere within that zone. And that's a really big deal. You can also use spot focus, you can use single point focus, 4 points around or 8 points around. So there are a lot of focus methods that I can utilize depending upon what I really want to do, and I do use a lot of them. I mean, if I want to isolate just a single bird, you know, in the past we had to make sure that we put that little spot on that bird. You know, with the subject to detect, it is absolutely amazing in the zones. And if you have a clear sky, you know, where the bird is easily discernible, that camera is going to lock right on that like nobody's business. It's phenomenal how fast. I mean, it actually locks on way faster than you could adjust with your, you know, manually like we used to have to do in the past. And again, the technology, it's an asset. It's a huge asset. And to see something like the R3 now, which actually has eye control, which is we can look through the, you know, the viewfinder, and the focus is going to track our pupil. How do you beat that? I mean, that's just, you know, you look at the bird, the thing locks on the bird, to press the shutter, and bang, you got it.
Got a great question here that I think a lot of wildlife photographers, particularly so many who are getting into the craft of photographing birds, may be interested in, and that is, in general, Chaz, do you have a preference when you capture flying birds for the wings to be sharp or to have some degree of intentional blur in them?
I mix it up, right? So I posted a pintail yesterday that we shot at 32/100th of a second, and it is tack sharp. I mean, every part of that bird is nailed. But I do like shooting slightly slower shutter speed, so I do impart, you know, some motion in like the flight feathers and the primaries. You know, it's just, nature's not static. I think that it's always moving, you know, and that's important for me to illustrate sometimes. So again, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a creative nuance, but that's what makes things really, really cool for me. I can mix it up, right? So if there's a flock of birds like there are here, I shoot it every way I can. You know, I tell people every time, if there's something that's working with us, you know, that's not going to take off, or you're shooting something that's sessile, take 4 pictures, right? Do a horizontal, do a vertical, do a close-up, do an environmental. Capture the essence of what's there. Don't just shoot 500 pictures, you know, headshots of an animal, right? You want to walk away with as much diversity in the portfolio that you possibly can. So Make Believer Magazine hired you to do it, right? You want to cover the story. So again, that's a great question for me, and I think that I will do that. I'll shoot it so it's tack sharp, and then I'll shoot slower shutter speeds, and probably will prefer the one where the primaries have a little bit of movement in there as a preference.
Thanks so much, Chaz. So to spread the love, we're going to go back over to Kelly. She's got some birds as well, and a nice scene going on over there. Kelly, how you doing out there?
I'm doing great. I'm shooting like crazy in multiple different directions. The sun came out, reflected onto the mountains reflected into the water. There was just so much going on. And you guys were just talking about, you know, slower shutter speeds versus the faster shutter speeds and getting things in focus and tack sharp or movement. I wholeheartedly agree with Chaz. It kind of just depends on how you're feeling in the situation. I really enjoy making movement with images and perhaps even abstracting it at times. There are some shots actually that I'll bring up that I'll show you very quickly of some that I took earlier. Let's see here. So here's one that, you know, I shot earlier, and it's definitely not tack sharp, but it's, you know, it's abstract enough. You can tell it's birds, but, you know, I was just having fun, and that's really the point of it. A lot of it, you know, in terms of bird photography, wildlife photography, it's different depending on the person. You just need to have fun with it, experiment, see what kinds of different looks and things that you can get to make it your own.
That's some beautiful photos out there, Kelly. So we're getting a lot of different questions. I think a great question to ask would be some advice for some of our new birders out there that are starting out. Kelly, what would you give as far as advice to somebody that's starting out? Maybe they're getting a new camera for Christmas. Maybe they're just going to be starting a new hobby with the new year. What do you have to say about that?
First things first, I would pay attention to the light. Pay attention to where the light's going to be that day, where you would like to shoot. Kind of plan it out in advance. Where the sun's coming up and the time, you want to be there maybe an hour or at least a half hour before the sun comes up, because that light is special. It's a very, very beautiful light before that sun peeps out. Also, use the gear. I always tell my customers this, use the gear until you don't have to think about it. You just use it and use it and use it. Everybody can learn anything technical, and then you get to a point where you're so comfortable with your gear, you're just creative. And that's where the beautiful shots come out. So it's fun to know the technical, but you need to know the technical to be completely creative. You tell the camera what to do. And that's really the best thing. The camera is a wonderful tool. It can do so many different things for you. And those are my two things. Oh, number 3, just one last thing. When you're looking up at the bird, keep your mouth shut.
Love it, Kelly. So everybody that's viewing, if you have questions, please put them in. Let us know how you're liking this event. To go and keep the action out in the field and away from our showroom here in New York. We're going to send it back over to Chaz. He's got some action to show us. What do you got, Chaz?
Yeah, we got some cool stuff going on, but it's kind of backlit. The sun's up pretty high, and most of the birds are kind of left. So I think what we're going to do is try and bail here and head over to Kelly, which is going to take us a little bit of time. So maybe you guys on the other end can kind of take over for us for a bit until we get to meet you on the other side.
Can we get Yeah. So we actually had a great question. We actually had a great question about what lens you're actually shooting right now. And I believe it was Ben Saunders again. He was asking, is that the 100 to 500? Yes, indeed, that is the RF 100 to 500 that Chaz was actually operating there. It's an excellent lens. Rudy, what are your favorite features on that lens?
The cool things about the 100 to 500 are the image quality. It's an L series lens, so there's definitely an uptick in terms of its contrast and color rendition, sharpness, and so on. The fact that it is so light for a lens of its type, and that you still get up to 500 millimeters with it. So as great as the L series 100 to 400 was in the EF lens line for our digital SLRs, and that's a fantastic lens for wildlife, this one in some ways has upped the ante even a little bit further. But that said, the 100 to 400 L series lens for the digital SLRs is a fantastic lens. If you're using it and you're happy using the digital SLRs and that lens, keep right on using it. I got a real quick question for Chaz, and this one is from, again, I apologize if I'm butchering the name, Yusuf Gisami, and again, apologies if that's not correct, but he asked a great question, and that is, if you were to look at your image catalog right now and pick some of your favorite photographs, would they be the ones that were the result of extensive planning and numerous visits to the same spots to get those compositions, or ones that kind of seem to come more spontaneously, that you just kind of happened upon?
I think that is an extraordinary question, and So we've been going to Jasper up in the Canadian Rockies for a number of years. And we went to do a workshop there. We're there for probably 5 days. The first 3 days we got this moose, we're photographing it. Fourth day we go there, it's at sunrise. All of a sudden there's a huge alpenglow. The moose walks into the river. We get pictures that are probably, they're just phenomenal. They're some of my best selling, photographs ever, portfolio pieces, if you will. And somebody asked, well, how long did it take you to get that picture? And I said, well, let's see. It either took, 5 trips in over 10 years or 250th of a second, right? So the people who were with me the first time, they got it the first week. They got it that day, right? For me, it took 10 trips. So you never really know. It is serendipity. We do try and do as much due diligence as possible. I'm trying to do the planning and find out, okay, what the best location, what's the best time of year, what's the best light. We're checking moon charts, sun charts, all of that stuff. We're doing intel, talking to people who've been there the week before, as I did here before I came to Bosque. Try and cover your bases and maximize the potential while you're on site. But most certainly, things happen. And serendipity plays a big role. And from a photographer's perspective, it doesn't really matter to me, which it took. Whether it took that 10 years of scouting or it took that, serendipity and, I got thrown a bone and got the images. The crucial question is having the ability to adapt quickly on location. Right? So we can set our plans up, as I did this morning, to try and get the blast off. Well, it didn't happen. So how do I take lemons and turn it into lemonade? Right? So a long time ago, a guy told me, there's a horse in here somewhere. The picture's there. You just have to see it. And guys will go out and they'll buy those 600 millimeter lenses. And just because you bought that doesn't mean that's what you're going to see in front of you. Look with your eyes first, and again, pick the right tool for the job. As I said before, I have from 24 millimeters to 600 millimeters with me. And that's what it's about. It's about, you can have the preconceived notions and you can be as proactive as possible, but have the ability to be able to adapt quickly on location. And I'll just throw this up to you. It's extremely important for people to know the ergonomics of their camera. If you're trying to do the weekend warrior thing and you're picking up the camera, once every month and you're trying to get things done quickly, you're gonna have a problem. Sit on the couch. I got the R3 and the R5. I'm sitting there and I'm checking the eye tracking on my TV set. So my wife comes downstairs and she goes, what are you doing? I says, I'm trying to see how the eye detect works. So she just shakes her head and she walks back upstairs. But that's the reality. I want to be able to put that camera in a black bag and know where everything is, particularly the ISO, the f-stop, the shutter speed, and and how to adjust the autofocus. The rest of the stuff, that's not as important. But the faster you can do that stuff, it's going to equate to better imagery.
Well said, Chaz. To give you a little bit more information about where we're shooting and a little bit more about that environment, we're going to go and show a quick video about our friends of Bosque del Apache.
I'm Tricia Sanchez, Membership Care Manager for Friends of Bosque del Apache. Bosque del Apache was established in 1939 as a refuge and breeding ground for migratory birds and other wildlife. It's made up of more than 57,000 acres, including 3 wilderness areas and 12 river miles. It's a historic and active floodplain situated right in the middle of the Central Flyway, and wildlife have depended upon it for millennia. Incredibly, only 2% of historic wetlands still remain in the American Southwest. So Bosque del Apache is a habitat that is more critical and vital now than ever before. Throughout the year, the refuge provides sanctuary for countless species of flora and fauna, including 4 federally listed species and 408 species of birds. Despite its importance, the refuge is facing many challenges today, including a river that is more heavily taxed by a growing population and exaggerated periods of drought. Friends of Bosque del Apache is a nonprofit organization dedicated to meeting the needs of the refuge. We've been able to accomplish tangible and meaningful support thanks to contributions from members just like you. If you'd like to learn more, please visit us online at www.friendsofbosquedelapache.org.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Between Rudy and myself, we are so excited to have all of you join us all across the world. Wherever you're watching from, if you want to go and continue to go and check in and have your questions answered by either Kelly or Chaz, please feel free to use the hop-in chat. Additionally, if you're using any social media, please spread the word about this event. For every registrant that actually registers for this event and starts to watch, we'll actually be donating $1 to that Bosque del Apache Wildlife Reserve. So that wildlife refuge plays a huge part in conservation, and that's obviously super important to all of us here at Canon and all of us that are photographers. So to keep our birds safe and keep our various parks out there looking beautiful, please spread the word about this event, and we hope we can go and keep on answering questions. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think you summed it up pretty nicely there, Brandon. And, you know, we still have questions coming in. We have a team of people here at Canon, not just Brandon and myself, that are answering these. But in the few minutes we have remaining, did you see anything that would be of particular interest to our audience that we can ask ask to Chaz or to Kelly?
Yeah, we had a couple of great questions about teleconverters and different setups. So maybe we can go back out to Chaz and get some of his thoughts on use of teleconverters. And he's got the big guy out there now. Chaz, what's your setup there? Tell us a little bit about it, and tell us what your working distance is to the birds.
Yes. No, thanks. The birds are pretty far off now. There is a really cool one Sandhill crane that's isolated that has a really cool reflection, so I decided to pop the bigger lens on. But more importantly, you know, the new super telephotos are extremely lightweight, and they change the way that we do things in the field. So this is the RF 600, which is almost similar in weight, almost identical to the EF 603. So here's the deal. We're on a tripod, right? You could just pick this up one hand. I mean, that's how light it is, which is huge for me. I want the ability to be able to move up and down, turn left and right when I'm in the field, and get those fleeting moments as much as I can. I can go left, I can go right, but if I want to lower it, I got to raise or lower the legs. So why do I want to use a tripod? Right? Well, if I'm shooting static subjects and I'm in one location, if I'm shooting slow shutter speeds, if I want to do video or pan. But otherwise, this tripod's going to the side. And I could sit here, flip this up real fast, rip off pictures, go horizontal, vertical. I could move up, I could move down, and I can get those little fleeting moments that I can't do with a tripod. Rudy was talking to us about the 1-500. That lens is phenomenal. It is tack sharp at 5.6, and you can put a converter on there. So you can put a 1.4 converter on that 1-500, but with that particular lens, you're going to start at 300 millimeters. And that brings up another question. So people will take 70-200s, they'll take additional zoom lenses, and they'll put a converter on there. Well, for me, I would particularly only use the converter if I'm going to shoot at the far end of the focal length. So if I have a 70-200 and I want to get longer than 200, that's the reason for me to put the converters on, right? I don't want to put it on there if I'm going to shoot less than that, for multiple reasons. First, it's going to decrease my aperture, right? So with the 2.8, I'm going to go to f4, right? If I got a 2x, then I'm going to go to 5.6. So I lose 2 stops with the 2x and 1 stop with the 1.4. You do lose slight quality with the 1.4 and a little bit more with the 2x, and that's regardless of brand. That's how they all work. So think in terms of magnification for a moment. Okay, I have a 600 millimeter lens. 50 millimeters is basically 1 power. So 50 goes into 600 12 times. That's 12x magnification. Okay, if I put the 2x on there, I'm at 24 magnification. Any flaw in my technique is going to be magnified, right? So because I increase magnification, shutter speed becomes more important. I have to raise my shutter speed. Well, if the light remains the same, that means I have to raise my ISO, right? So when you're using those teleconverters, you have to be aware of other features. It's not just a magnification increase, but it's going to make us increase our ISO, right? Have a smaller aperture, use a lower shutter speed, or a combination thereof. But teleconverters are extremely versatile, and I do use them. You know, I can pop a 1.4 on here, I'm at 840. Really sharp. And normally with the converters, just as a tip, I stop down 2/3 to 1 stop, off maximum aperture. Meaning if I have an f4 lens and I put a 1.4, I'm at 5.6. So I'm going to stop down 2/3, 6.1, right? I'm going to go to 6.3, 7.1. So I'll either shoot at 7.1 or f8 because I'm shooting more through the central portion of the converter, and I do get a little bit of a sharper image. right? So again, then I have to stop down further. And that's the same thing the guy asked me before with polarizers and things like that. So normally with wildlife, I can't afford to put a 2-stop polarizer on my lens, right? I can't afford that light loss because normally what we shoot in primary light and the best golden morning and late afternoon, early morning stuff requires that we let as much light into the camera as we can. So I do use those filters. I do use ND filters to control the amount of light coming into the camera. If I want to do slow shutter speeds in bright light, or if I want to just flip my camera to video, I have a variable ND filter that I can put on there, and that works, super as well. So teleconverters, I recommend that you have them, especially a 1.4. I think that's extremely versatile. I probably use the 1.4 more than I do a 2X. There are times where the 1.4, I don't get the light loss as much, so I can keep the shutter speeds up and don't increase the ISOs. So a lot of times I would prefer to crop a superiorly sharp image at lower ISO than use the converter and have to shoot at higher ISO.
Thanks for sharing, Chaz. For all of you that are out there, I hope that you're enjoying this event. If you are, please post up in our hop-in chat. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear that feedback. If you're enjoying this event, if you're having a great time with us, between Rudy and myself, Chaz and Kelly out in the field, what I want to do is share a link. If you see in the chat, Rebecca Nichols from our team posted up a link. Please go and click there if you'd like to go and sign up for a future workshop with us for one of these live events. We will love to go and put these on, but we obviously want to make sure we're having you guys join us along for the ride. So, Rudy, do you want to go and add anything?
I want to ask a question to Kelly and my colleague Kelly Anderson, who is also on site at Bosque del Apache. And real quick, in asking this question, I want to answer another question. Somebody wrote in and asked, where is Bosque del Apache? It's in New Mexico and maybe roughly 50 miles or so south of Albuquerque. It's right off Interstate 25, I think it is. And it's virtually an oasis in terms of a national wildlife refuge. But for Kelly, I want to ask, you've been there now for a few days this time, and I believe you've been to Bosque before. And one of the things is that at this point of the year, when so many of the birds are migrating, the fact of the matter is it tends to get pretty cold. Especially early in the morning when so many of the great shots happen. Are there any particular precautions that you've put into practice in terms of keeping you and especially your gear ready to go and avoiding problems with the cold?
Yep, it does get chilly here. We're in the northern desert, so in the morning, I'd say, depending on, the year, this time it was around 20, 25 degrees. And so we make sure that we're warm with hand warmers, boot warmers, gloves, hats, whatever you got to do, layers. The key to this place is layers because in a couple of hours it's going to be about 60 degrees, 65, maybe even more. So you don't want to get too hot later either if you're still shooting. For the gear, you have to if you're out in the cold, then you have to be careful going back into the heat. And, because then sometimes you'll get some fog up on your camera lens. And so you just need to give it time. You need to give it time to relax and be ready to shoot. We were out here when it was still dark, setting up. We had our red lights on so that it didn't affect exposure or the birds. And we were just very mindful and quiet about that. Set up our cameras, made sure that everything was good to go and that everything was acclimated to the temperature.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. I saw a question in here from, I believe it was Elizabeth Starr. Can you tell us a bit more about the image stabilization of the mirrorless cameras and lenses? I see Kelly's hand holding and Chaz is using a tripod. So Kelly, I know you have a lot of different lenses. Tell us a little bit about why you chose that particular one.
I chose this lens. Well, it's new and I wanted to shoot with it. I thought it would be good for birds. It's a 100 to 400, and right now I also have the RF 1.4x extender on it, which makes it 560 milliliters. So with that, you get some extra push on it, and especially when you have more light, it's much easier to use. I'm using this lens, which has internal optical image stabilization, and it's on the EOS R5, which has in-body IBIS image stabilization. The two work really well together, and in conjunction, depending on the lens that you have on the body, this setup specifically, I get about a 6-stop correction. And because of that, and because of the autofocusing system in the camera, and the amazing low light, clean, high ISO images that I get out of this camera and off the sensor, I can handhold. It's the way that I decided to go this time. I've been to Bosque a bunch of times with larger lenses, beautiful, beautiful lenses on my tripod. If I'm doing long exposures and landscape, I'll go that route. But for the birds today, I really wanted to just handhold, and I have my tripod just in case, and just be able to move. The birds are moving fast. They're up in the sky. I wanted to be able to follow them and see how it held up, and it's held up really well. I'm using the animal autofocusing, the eye autofocusing, and it's catching on to them. It's made it quite easy for me to photograph, so it's nice. It's a nice setup. I'm enjoying it.
I've got a question for Chaz, and it kind of harkens back to something that Kelly said earlier. Kelly made a great point about birding photography in that you often want to try to position yourself as a photographer so that birds are basically coming into the wind. In other words, as a photographer, the wind is basically at your back, heading toward the subject, because birds, as they take off in particular, like to fly into the wind. So the question, Chaz, is this. Whether you're at a resource like, a place like Bosque with so many opportunities, or if you're just working in, a field near your house or in a park or something like that, there are a lot of considerations and compromises you have to make in terms of a photographer positioning him or herself. What is, in general, what's more important to you? Positioning yourself in terms of the lighting and maybe as a secondary thing, background and how that appears aesthetically, or the wind when we're photographing birds?
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Thank you very
Sarcastic,
much.
but yes. Yeah, have a good day. I mean, that's the reality, all of the above, right? So it just depends. I mean, you could do backlit. Normally, again, I'm choosing that window of opportunity. So I could pick the light on the subject, I can pick my background to the best of my ability, and then I have to wait for the subject to orient itself correctly to the light. So I'm not a huge fan of the light coming straight over my shoulder. I want to show three-dimensionality in my photographs, and for that I need shadows. So I will take a couple of strides left to right of the sun to get it off axis. But the more off axis I go, the more dramatic the light, the more I have to wait for the subject to turn itself to the light source. So if I'm going to expose for the light on its face, for instance, I got to wait for the bird to turn its light to the face. Right, so I do lose some of the, a percentage of pictures because they're facing the wrong direction. But for me, the pictures will be much more dramatic. So it all depends. If I know they're going to fly, then it's the art of compromise. Right, it's what's going to be more important to me. And it just depends on the photograph. My whole career is designed to take a three-dimensional world and make it look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional plane, whether that's a print or whether that's a monitor. Right, so I need shadows. I want shadows. I want to be able to see, feather detail and detail in snow and highlights and things like that, which means I can't have the light, directly, on the particular subject because I lose that. Right, and then we take a long lens and we compress it. So it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just different. For me, I prefer the light off axis a little bit, but if the flight, is much more important, it's different. I think to further answer your question, it does depend on the quality of the light, right? So as a photographer, you learn quantity of light, quality of light, and direction of light. So if the sky is overcast and it's a big softbox, then yeah, for the most part, the wind is going to be most important because the lighting direction is, sort of flat. If the light is a smaller point source and more directional, then that might be more important. But yeah, it's a compromise. And, again, not to sound silly, but yeah, the answer is yes.
So we got another great question, very similar to that, from Ben Saunders. He was asking about giving advice for shooting in backlit conditions. So are you changing metering modes? Are you positioning yourself in a certain way? How are you working in backlight conditions?
It depends on the camera. Mirrorless has made backlighting basically a non-problematic situation now. Again, what you see is what you get. So essentially, you're looking through the viewfinder, you're just dialing it in to make sure that your histogram is not pegged to the right side, right? So you can still do the ETTR thing, exposed to the right, just make sure that you're not clipped. You have all the detail in your highlights and rock and roll really fast. As you move left or right of the axis, like let's say the sun's in the water, when we're doing backlit silhouettes and things like that, so I could set the exposure in real time. Where beforehand we would set a meter pattern, and then we would either pick and choose and have to adjust compensation as we move the camera left or right. For me, I just adjust it in real time. And again, I'm not kind of the auto guy. Some guys will put it in auto ISO, but if I zoom in and I fill the frame more with black, the auto ISO is going to give me an incorrect recommendation, and I'm going to vary from there. Most people think, okay, the camera gives me the correct exposure, and then I'm going to vary it, subject to taste. Well, that's the premise, right? That's the goal. But it doesn't always do that. If it did correctly, then we wouldn't have to apply compensation, right? So the camera's given us its best choice, right? It goes through all these algorithms and everything that they put in there, and it gives us the best option. But then you're going to dial compensation to make the picture not necessarily correct, but more salt and pepper to your taste. Maybe you want to make a high key picture and blow out the highlights, right? Maybe you want to make the shadows, really black and make the picture dramatic, but that's your creative choice. So for me, again, I want to be in control of it. And for the most part, I'm going to set the camera up in manual mode, and set it up accordingly. If I'm in a place like Yellowstone, okay, and it's an overcast day, essentially the exposure is going to be the same for hours at a time. So I get out, if I'm using spot meter and a DSLR, I'll point it at the snow. I'll go +2 in the spot meter. I will be proactive and fire off a picture to make sure it's correct. And then if the animal pops in the same light, all I have to do is, react, focus, and fire. So by being proactive, I'm way ahead of the game. If I put the camera in automatic mode and I fire off that picture, it might be once in a lifetime, now it's light, now it's dark, I'm doomed, right? So as I did say before, if you are in automatic mode and you understand same light, same exposure, point the camera at the snow, you can set the spot meter +2 and aperture priority, fire it off, hit the auto exposure lock with the hold function, which means that we'll lock the exposure in the camera until the camera goes into standby or shuts off, and you could fire just like manual. So that's a quick thing to do, right? Normally exposure choices, okay, there's meter patterns and there's priority modes. They're two independent. And if you understand that, then you can understand how to put the two together for the circumstance at hand, right? So meter pattern is evaluative metering, spot metering, center weighted, average, and then we have the priority modes. So manual mode just means I'm going to change the variables myself. The camera's not going to do that. If I'm in aperture priority, I pick the f-stop, the camera picks the shutter speed. In shutter priority, you pick the shutter speed, camera picks the aperture, right? Based upon the meter pattern in use. That's what's going to give us the recommendation. If I'm in manual mode, essentially it's the same cognitive process. I'm going to say, okay, what's most important? Well, 5.6. So I assign 5.6. And then I have the option of either adjusting my ISO or my f-stop. Right? So let's say, for instance, I'm out here, the birds are going to take off like this crane is going to be at the moment while I'm talking to you. And I say, okay, I need 2,000th of a second. I need f8 because it's flying at me at a 45-degree angle. So I go 2,000 f8, and then all I'm going to do in real time is just adjust the ISO. So it's perfect. The other thing to consider is it's not always about where the subject is. It's about where you want the subject to be when you're going to depress the shutter. So I might look right here and the bird's great. But you know what? Right to the left, 20 feet, it looks a little bit better. So I'm going to set my exposure up for there. If the bird's in the shade, and then I know the bird's going to jump in the sun, I already know the sun exposure. It's 1600, 5.6, and 200 ISO. Sunny 16, that's what it always is. So I'm going to set that in the camera, the bird jumps from the shade to the sun, and I shoot it and go to lunch. right? If I put the camera in auto mode and then I fire it off, I might miss that decisive moment. I don't want to do that. It's all about capturing those fleeting behavioral moments that are going to make the difference. And I want to tell the camera what to do. I don't want the camera to tell me.
Well, speaking of lunch, we're going to let you take a bite off camera. We're going to go over to Kelly, and we got a great question from Mark. Mark is asking any advice that you might be able to share about shooting all white birds. So Kelly, I think you might have some all white birds over there or somewhat white birds, but I know you have experience shooting our cranes out there. So any advice for exposure, where exposure may change with each beat of the wing of the bird?
Yeah, I do. For all white birds and for really any situation, it's really important to know how to read your histogram and know what you want out of the image. So if the histogram is all the way to the right, that's pure white, and all the way to the left, that's pure black. And just like Chaz was talking about, if you're doing an auto metering, the camera's going to go for middle gray. So you have to keep in mind that you want your birds to be white. And so for that information, you're going to want some information over on the right side of that histogram. If there's darkness in the image, there will be information across the line. So it's really that's the biggest thing to do, is to not just look at the back of your LCD screen, because that's not always going to help you. Depending on how dark it is or how light it is out, you can't always tell your exposure from just by looking at the back of your LCD. You need to know how to learn your histogram, because if you blow it out too much, especially if you're not shooting in RAW and you're shooting in JPEG, then the information's not there and you won't be able to see those feathers.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Thanks, Kelly. Who did you have?
Yeah, a couple of public service announcements and then a question. The public service announcements are, first off, we have a few minutes left in this event, so certainly if you haven't already, put your questions into our chat on the hopin.com platform, and we'll be happy to do everything we can to get those answered for you in the time we have left. And the second part of the public service announcement is that if you simply want to see this event again, or if you missed any of it, we will be replaying this on the Canon USA YouTube channel. It'll be up on YouTube for you to watch at your leisure on the Canon USA YouTube channel. So feel free to go to that, and it should be up there shortly if it isn't already. Real quick, a question, and this one I'll give to Chaz. In terms of camera and lens support, I know a lot of what you do nowadays is going to be handheld for the flexibility. But briefly, can you talk to us about any use of tripods that you may do or may have done in the past with heavier lenses? And the same thing with monopods. For wildlife applications and specifically for birding and birds in flight, any thoughts on that from you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely use a tripod at times, particularly if I'm in a stationary spot like this, and as light as the RF 600 is and like an R3 camera, it does get heavy after a while. So yeah, I will use a stabilizer, whether it's three-legged or a monopod. I think the monopod definitely allows more flexibility. You'll see guys at sporting events who are running up and down fields and, and things like that. Just as a wildlife photographer, if I'm on the move and I'm following, an animal, yeah, a monopod is much more versatile than trying to hump that tripod, all around the field with you. So it definitely has advantages, particularly now, and especially because these new lenses, with the in-body stabilization and the lens stabilization and how they work in conjunction with each other, some of them we can get up to 8 stops. I mean, I tried in my house with the 1-500 when I bought it. I shot unbelievably 1/15 of a second at 500 millimeters, handheld. And that stuff was chack sharp. So these innovations now that Canon has in these lenses, they're groundbreaking. I think it's industry leading with the 8 stops of combined IFs that we have. And it has changed the way that we photograph. And that enables me to shoot things, handheld that I couldn't do before. So you still have to be cognizant of subject movement, but at least I can negate the camera shake, with the in-body and IS in the lens.
That's a great point. And we love the image stabilization. We got a lot of different image stabilized lenses on this table. I want to kind of jump into a little bit more of an entry-level type question for somebody that might be starting out with birding. So as a birding enthusiast myself, one of the questions that I had in the beginning is, how can I get close and approach those birds in a safe manner, not to startle them, not to give them stress? So what are your advice to actually position yourself properly and respect the bird and the environment?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, wildlife first, always, above the photograph, and I see too many people kind of do the other thing. Normally, it's low and slow. Don't be in a hurry. Take your time, take a picture from distance and, walk up 20 feet, take another picture. Walk up 20 feet, take another picture. Typically, if the animal's paying attention to you, we freeze. If the animal's going about its normal business, or it's feeding or doing something, then you can kind of move up. If it stops, and the behavior's altered and it looks at you again, freeze, right? So our goal is to photograph natural behavior. I don't want to alter it. So I'm really cognizant of that. If we're doing something and the animal behavior gets altered too much, it's not worth the picture to me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to disturb that natural behavior. All I want to do essentially is document it. Typically, it's also best if you don't walk straight at something. So if you kind of make a little bit of a meandering, circuitous route to the subject, it's a group of people walk in a straight line, right? Don't spread out. If you're walking down the street in Manhattan, you're by yourself and there's 5 other people on the other side of the road, and they're all in a tight group and they're talking amongst themselves, and you'll probably just continue down the street. But if they spread out, now the animal's going to look at it as multiple threats. More than likely, it's going to turn around or leave.
Oh, that's great, Chaz. We're down to a couple of minutes or so left. Maybe I can turn it to Kelly for a moment and ask Kelly if you have any thoughts to kind of sum up advice and so on that you can give to birding enthusiasts. And while I know Chaz speaks eloquently to the high-end birding enthusiast, maybe you can just give a couple of personal observations to folks that are kind of getting their feet wet, pardon the pun, with bird photography in general.
Sure. A lot of times I speak to people and they don't feel like their gear is good enough, or they might think that they need to have the absolutely newest and greatest gear. And I get it, because I always want the newest and greatest gear too. It's always cool and exciting. But you need to think in terms of, is your camera doing exactly what you need it to do? Do you wish it was doing something that it's not doing for you? Have you had that camera for a while and you just want to move up because you're being told that you need to? Sometimes what you have is good. It's especially when you're learning and you're still trying to figure out what you need. Sometimes what you have is great to start off with, and then when you get your feet wet and you get into it, you start to realize, okay, I need to get a telephoto lens. I need to get a zoom telephoto. I need to get a converter or something. That way you're not getting gear that you don't need. I also recommend just having fun with it and being courteous to all the people around you, and especially the animals like Chaz was just talking about, and doing research on that. But really use the gear that you have until you know exactly what you need to get. Reach out to people at Canon and we'll help you try to decide what you need and what's best for you.
So we have a variety of different lenses out here, and one of the things that I think a lot of people might get a little bit intimidated by is different types of series of products. Obviously, we have our white lenses, our L series lenses, but we also have a lot of affordable products for anybody that's actually looking to start out. Birding is really getting a lot more accessible with products like our 600 f11, our 800 f11 lenses. These are extremely compact, lightweight. If you notice, this could fit in a backpack very easily or a crossbody. And when you're ready to go and actually be in position, pretty much lock it down, put your camera on there, and you have a great time. So a lens like this, incredibly light, keeps you mobile, and it helps you to actually get that shot, as opposed to having to go and set up a tripod with a heavier lens perhaps, or lug around gear for further distances. So there's a lot of great technology that's out there, and it's all about, obviously getting out, exploring, and enjoying the wildlife that's out there. So one more friendly reminder, there's actually going to be a poll that's up. So if you've had a great time with us, please be sure to visit that poll. Miss Rebecca Nichols posted it up in our chat, so I'm going to pin that up to the top. But we are enjoying having you, and hopefully you're enjoying as well. We're going to send it back out to Chaz for a little bit. I think he's got some birds as well.
Yeah, I have an important thing to say as well. It's not all about the equipment, right? It's not. We all want the latest, greatest, and we all want the super expensive gear. But I think you brought up a really valid point. That 600 f4 and that 600 f4, that 600 f11 and the 800 f11, they are tack sharp. I mean, they are phenomenal lenses. They're super lightweight. So if you want to be unencumbered and you want to go out in the field, I will take that. I honestly will keep it with me. I mean, it's a phenomenal lens, and it does allow people to capture images that they couldn't get any other way. And the 1:5s, the 1:4s, all those lenses. And if you put a converter on there and you crop the pictures and you do whatever you need to do, it's about, for me, honestly, to be out here, that's 3/4 of it. And we all get wrapped up in being out here, seeing what we did this morning. And I think too many people take that for granted. And you can learn to stalk birds. If you have people who say, I can never get close enough, I need an 800 millimeter lens to do everything. My guess is you're probably not, you don't understand the behavior of the subject, right? Or your stalking ability, or like you said, how do we approach the animals, is not up to what it should be. So you don't have to do that. It's not all about the latest, greatest gear. The R5 is a phenomenal camera. Hey, they came out with an R3. Yeah, they did, and it's got unbelievable tech. But you could still do phenomenal pictures with that R5. And like I said, pick the best tool for the job. Just because somebody else bought the new camera doesn't mean that's the best tool for you, right? We have a whole line of cameras. And that's because there are different genres and people with different, dollars and cents in your pocket, to be honest with you. But it's not all about, having the latest, greatest gear. If that's what you want to do and you aspire to be a professional, sure, by all means, go for it, But you can do it with the other gear. You can honestly do it. And if I post those pictures from that 611, or I post a picture from a 600 f4, which might have a slight difference in price of maybe $12,000, the picture is still going to be phenomenal. If you understand the light, and you understand the behavior, and you have the right settings in the camera. It's not all about the gear, and you have to impress that upon people. The gear does make a difference when you get to a certain point. There's no doubt about it. But you can do it. And I urge you to get out there, enjoy what we have here. That's what it's about. For me, it's more about the teaching. It's not really about the picture for me right now. It's about just what I did. It's about telling you how to do it and seeing you come away with the best picture you possibly can. That's what gets me excited. This was phenomenal. And I hope you guys really appreciate the effort. I can't believe what it just took to pull this off. The amount of equipment, the amount of people, a 13-person crew, the stuff that goes on, behind the scenes, it's overwhelming, and I'm pretty humbled to be a part of it. And I thank you guys for joining in, and I definitely hope you sign in for for future Get Up and Go programs.
Chaz, that's a great point to close on. And I really want to thank everybody on the team involved in making this happen, as you just so eloquently did. And particularly, I want to thank my colleague, Kelly Anderson, and you, Chaz, for the fantastic information that you've given our viewers over this time. And I'll turn it to Brandon to kind of close things out. Thanks so much.
Yeah, as a birder, doing this event means a lot to all of us. We appreciate everybody that's viewing. We appreciate all the insight, knowledge, and all the support that we're getting from Chaz and Kelly. And we hope that you all enjoyed your time with us. Keep in mind, if you want to go and attend future Get Up and Go with Canon events, there is a link in the chat. We'll go and pin that as we keep on going. But we want to definitely thank you all for joining And also thank you for the opportunity to donate some money to the Bosque del Apache Wildlife Refuge. This is obviously a very great opportunity to take care of our wildlife and take care of our beautiful scenery out in America. So thank you to everybody that's joining all across the world. And we look forward to actually hosting another one of these and seeing you at the next one. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and hopefully everybody has a great holiday.
Thank you, folks.
How's it going, guys? Tony here, and welcome to Canon USA.
What's up, everybody? Peter McKinnon here.
Hey everyone, Larry Chen here.
Hi, Vanessa Joy. I'm wedding and portrait photographer.
I'm Erin Bobnick, landscape photographer.
My name is Keith Budzinski.
I'm Laura Jade.
I am Lindsay Weatherspoon.
I'm Rudy Winston, and I'm honored to introduce you to the Canon EOS R3.
This camera is wild.
I honestly think I got my favorite shot of the year. I don't even know what to say.
We have a lot of fun content in store for you. Subscribe, and we'll see you soon.